The pantheon of comic book movies is now so vast and, let's face it, convoluted, that it can be tough for even the most committed devotees to keep track of it all. And with the enormous success of the Marvel Cinematic Universe in particular, practically every major movie studio is now trying to jump on the shared world bandwagon, whether for superhero fare or not. But of course, the tangled, complex world of character rights also ensures that filmmakers and studios can't always get what they want, and so sometimes they'll resort to creating links between comic book movies in secrecy. It all nevertheless provides some fun food for thought for fans, even if they're easily missed by the casual observer. So with all that in mind, I'm Will for What Culture, and here are 10 comic book movies you didn't know were linked. Number 10, Batman Returns has an accidental Batman and Robin Easter egg. A sneaky half entry to begin this list, as the link between movies is purely coincidental, but makes way too much sense to ever ignore. Now, it's fair to say that there's only the faintest grasp of continuity between the Tim Burton and Joel Schumacher Batman movies, given how drastically they differ tonally and aesthetically. But in a curious case of wonderful coincidence, there's a cheeky Easter egg in Burton's Batman Returns, which dovetails perfectly into Schumacher's Batman and Robin. When we catch a glimpse at the villainous Max Shrek's office, the wall is adorned with pictures of Shrek schmoozing with various famous faces, including one Arnold Schwarzenegger. This in of itself is a pretty neat cameo, but it gets better when you consider that Schwarzenegger went on to play Mr. Freeze in Batman and Robin, and there's no reason why that picture can't be Shrek hanging out with a younger Victor Freeze prior to the latter's grief-induced insanity. It's just way too juicy to ignore. Number 9, Fantastic Four's extended cut confirms a shared universe with Fox's X-Men. 2005's largely forgettable Fantastic Four movie does nevertheless feature a single seconds-long moment in its extended cut, which heavily implies, if not confirms, that the Fantastic Four films exist in the same universe as the X-Men franchise, both being owned by Fox, at least at the time. When Reed Richards is explaining to Sue Storm that he thought she wanted a stronger man, he uses the body molding abilities to transform his face into that of Wolverine, a crude early 2000s CGI approximation of it anyway. The point isn't the trash VFX though, it's that, with this scene, Fox effectively confirmed that not only do the X-Men and the Fantastic Four share this universe, but the Four are aware of the X-Men, and likely the other way around too. Of course, these goofball movies never took themselves seriously enough to actually consider doing a crossover, but all the same, the link between them is there. Number 8, the Punisher totally saved Nick Fury in Captain America: The Winter Soldier. One of the most amusing discussions which followed the release of Captain America: The Winter Soldier was the identity of the person driving the yellow Penske truck which creams a fleet of crooked cops chasing down Nick Fury early in the film. It was just a matter of time before someone asked the Russo brothers themselves, and Joe Russo gamely offered up his own opinion. He said, quote, "The man who drives that truck is very highly trained. He thinks on his own terms. He's got a plan and a very specific skill set." Though the comment was said with a certain degree of jest, it nevertheless left fans assuming, quite understandably, that the driver was none other than Frank the Punisher Castle. Obviously, at this point in time, Netflix's Punisher series hadn't yet been given the green light, so we were left to defer to either Thomas Jane's Frank Castle from the 2004 movie, or Ray Stevenson's version from the 2008 ultra-violent Punisher Warzone. Given that Stevenson was already playing Volstagg in the Thor movies by this point in time, the choice was pretty clear. It was Thomas Jane's Punisher, who, following the success of 2012's Dirty Laundry short film, actually had a somewhat believable chance of joining the MCU, given a helping hand. Number 7, Superman 1978 and Supergirl 1984 share the same Jimmy Olsen. Don't feel bad if you've never seen 1984's Supergirl, let alone aren't aware of its lineage in the continuity of DC superhero movies. The twice Razzie-nominated comic book film was a major critical and commercial flop, despite the fact it was actually canon within the Christopher Reeve starring Superman movies. And while you'd be forgiven for not realizing this even if you have seen Supergirl, considering how utterly forgettable it is, there's a single piece of connective tissue between the two films which confirms the link. Mark McClure, who appeared in all 4 Reeves Superman movies as plucky Daily Planet photographer Jimmy Olsen, reprises the role briefly in Supergirl, spending a few scattered moments chattering with Kara Zor-El. While it is hilariously easy to forget, there's the proof, and given the abject silliness of Superman 4, is it really that hard to believe that these movies all exist in the same wacky universe? Number 6. The Punisher secretly appears in Spider-Man 2. The end of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2 features one of the most brilliantly weird links between superhero movies you're ever likely to witness, and you deserve a firm pat on the back if you actually noticed it yourself. When Mary Jane skips out on her wedding and runs to Peter in her wedding dress, there's a man on the right-hand side of the frame who turns his head and stares at a jubilant MJ running. The original plan was for this to be Thomas Jane's Frank Castle, as the Punisher had released just a few months before Spider-Man 2, and it would have provided some neat intertextuality between the 2 Marvel movies. But due to ever-pesky rights issues, the production was unable to get Jane's Punisher in the movie, and so Raimi sneakily decided to draft in the next best thing, Jane's stunt double from the film. The double bears a striking resemblance to Jane, obviously, so while it's easily missed by the casual observer, it's not entirely impossible to catch with your own 2 eyes. Number 5. Daredevil and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles share the same origin story. Believe it or not, but Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles creators Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird were heavily inspired by Frank Miller's work on the Daredevil comics in the early 1980s. This is to the extent that there are some glaring similarities between the 2 properties, which has naturally transpired through to many of the movies, in this case the original run of the 90s set live-action Turtles films and the 2003 Ben Affleck starring Daredevil. First and foremost, the comics make it clear that the Turtles were created by the very same ooze which caused Matt Murdock to go blind. Similarly, in the movies, it's stated that the Turtles were mutated by toxic waste, while Daredevil's opening sequence shows Matt blinded by a barrel of very similar looking toxic material. It's entirely plausible that, after turning Matt blind, the waste leaked down into the sewers and mutated Splinter and the Turtles. Given that Daredevil is set in the early noughties but Matt's accident occurs in his childhood, the timeline even matches up with the Turtles movies well enough. Furthermore, the Foot Clan, which appears in all 3 of the original live-action Turtles movies, started out as a parody of the ninja clan The Hand from the Daredevil comics. Though the Hand wasn't actually introduced in the 2003 Daredevil movie, they did appear in the 2005 spin-off Elektra, and likely would have played a larger role in the Daredevil sequel had the first film actually made enough money to warrant one. Number 4. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse and Venom are both obsessed with a Chinese messenger app. In Venom and Spider-Verse respectively, Eddie Brock and Miles Morales are shown to use the Chinese QQ instant messaging app on their phones. This is a rather odd coincidence, given that, in New York, who the hell is using QQ? The rub, inevitably, is that Venom was co-produced by Tencent Pictures, a subsidiary of Tencent, the Chinese conglomerate which owns and operates QQ. It's not a huge leap to suggest that some QQ product placement dropped into Spider-Verse was solid compensation for the Spider-Verse post-credit scene being included in Venom. But on a pure story level, the probability of 2 separate universes both using an esoteric chat app are remote enough that we're left to consider whether Venom and Spider-Verse could somehow be taking place in the same reality, despite their stark visual styles. Number 3. The Incredible Hulk returns did Thor's Ragnarok team-up almost 30 years earlier. Thor Ragnarok received considerable critical acclaim for its unique buddy movie tone, by its central two-hander between Thor and the Hulk. The inspired pairing was also literally inspired, given that Ragnarok wasn't the first movie to team up the 2 for a thoroughly daft adventure. Way back in 1988, almost 30 years prior, the 2 superheroes shared the screen for The Incredible Hulk Returns, a TV movie spin-off from the iconic series The Incredible Hulk. The film itself sees the Hulk and Thor forming an uneasy alliance to take down a criminal enterprise, and was actually intended to serve as a backdoor pilot of sorts for a potential Thor TV series, which evidently never came to pass. Though nobody's going to try and argue with a straight face that Ragnarok was actively trying to remake this relatively low-rent TV film, it did nevertheless establish a narrative and character framework not dissimilar to Ragnarok. Number 2. The Watchmen definitely exist in the DCEU. Though Zack Snyder's Watchmen is based on the DC graphic novel of the same name, the style and tone are so distinctly different from more mainstream DC comic offerings that it's easy to forget this. But Snyder, who of course helmed 2009's Watchmen movie and then went on to direct Man of Steel, Batman v Superman and a good portion of Justice League, couldn't resist but put a series of direct, indisputable links between the two properties. In Man of Steel, keep your eyes peeled during the Battle of Metropolis and you might notice the logo of Watchmen's comedian faintly tagged on the side of a wall, implying that the Watchmen most likely exist in some form in this universe. Even if you dismiss that as a mere Easter egg, it gets better. During the battle between the Dark Knight and Superman in Batman v Superman, the phrase "Who watches the Watchmen" is written in Latin, barely visible on a wall. Furthermore, in a deleted scene from Justice League, the Flash can be seen wearing a Black Freighter t-shirt, clearly in reference to the Tales of the Black Freighter comic, which exists in the world of Watchmen, and therefore, perhaps, also in this one. Though it wouldn't fit in with this continuity at all, there's also another link during Watchmen's opening title sequence where we see what appears to be Thomas and Martha Wayne being saved by the original Night Owl, which would likely result in Bruce never actually becoming Batman. Number 1. Sam Raimi's Spider-Man acknowledges the existence of Superman and Doctor Strange. The world of superhero movie rights are a delicate legal minefield, so it's little surprise that most comic book films play it safe by not even bothering to acknowledge other superheroes outside their wheelhouse for fear of blowback. But Sam Raimi's Spider-Man had no such fear, and, as is uncharacteristic for the genre, directly referenced heroes from two distinct, closed-off universes, seemingly implying that they actually exist within this world. First of all, in the original 2002 Spider-Man, Aunt May tells Peter, "You're not Superman, you know." Then in Spider-Man 2, J. Jonah Jameson ponders what name to give Doc Ock, and when his underling Ted Hoffman suggests Doctor Strange, Jameson knowing replies with, "That's pretty good, but it's taken." In both cases, the comments don't seem outwardly flippant, but actually plausibly point to a universe where Raimi's Spider-Man is swinging around in New York with the Sorcerer Supreme in active operation, and a world where Superman is a firmly established hero, if not a firmly established comic book character in universe. The logistics don't all match up, of course, especially in the case of MCU's Doctor Strange, but it's still fun to imagine the wider world of superheroism that Raimi's films hinted at. And there you have it, folks, 10 comic book movies you didn't know were linked. Feel free to drop this video a like if you enjoyed it, and drop me a follow on Twitter at YouSlyDogU. I'm Will for What Culture, thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you next time.